So I invite you once again to take 2 deep breaths as we prepare for meditation. As we settle into this sweet now moment that was prepared by that beautiful song. Breath of heaven. And it's so easy during this traditional time of the year to think of that heaven as someplace separate and far off. However, the man's birthday that we're celebrating tonight said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you." It is not a place far, far away. It is a place nearer than your breath and nearer than your heartbeat. Heaven is divine consciousness, higher consciousness. And when we remember it, when we remember that heaven is right here, right now, we feel that breath. Feel that presence right now. We can call it God. We can call it heaven. We can call it Christ. Simply know that that heaven is the very foundation of what you are. And so let us just rest for a little while in the comfort of the knowing that heaven is here and now. Feel heaven right there at the point of view. Feel your divinity. When we are in alignment with it, our divinity informs our humanity. So that we be the peace and we be the love right here and right now. And so let us claim our affirmations again. I am divine. I am peace. Together. I am divine. I am peace. Now maybe put your hand over your heart. And let's say it again. I am divine. I am peace. Now say it to yourself. I am divine. I am love. Together. I am divine. I am love. Feel that. Feel the truth of it. Know the truth of it beyond your intellectual knowing. Know it from your heart. I am divine. I am love. Together. I am divine. I am love. I am divine. I am peace and love. Together. I am divine. I am peace and love. Now take a deep breath. And let's claim it with authority. Together. I am divine. I am peace and love. Yes, feel it. Know it. Be it. And now with more energy. I am divine. I am peace and love. And let's say it even more energetically so that this truth reverberates throughout the universe. Together. I am divine. I am peace and love. And because there is only one mind and because there is only one presence, we know that truth has now instantaneously reverberated through all peoples at some level and some depth. And friends, that is the truth, the timeless truth. And let's claim it again. I am divine. I am peace and love. And we make that truth ever more real, ever more apparent right now. First, through our thought, then by the power of our word, and then by our deeds. And for that, we are grateful. Amen. And if I could take a few deep breaths. Good evening once again. So the title of my talk tonight is Jesus is Born. And one of the things that's interesting about New Thought and unity as a form of Christianity is it's very distinct from traditional Christianity. And sometimes we can get kind of a little whiplash in our consciousness because we love our traditional Christmas carols, which comes out of traditional Christianity. But New Thought and unity is not traditional. We look at Jesus and we look at Christ differently. And so I invite you now to go on a little journey with me. So in the next slide, so who is Jesus? Jesus was the man that lived over 2,000 years ago and was born where? And where was he raised up? In Nazareth, right? So Jesus was a man that was born of Mary and Joseph. And as he grew up, he realized that he had within him that which we call Christ. And that while in traditional Christianity we talk about Jesus being uniquely the Christ, uniquely the Son of God, within New Thought and Unity, we know that that Christ is an idea. That Christ is a state of consciousness that we each have within us. And that Jesus is called Jesus Christ because of the attainment he had of that consciousness and how he lived that consciousness. And we call him Wayshower because as we read what is reported on him in the Christian scriptures, we read about a very important life, don't we? And that life demonstrates a goodness and an expression of love. That is a model for us. Next slide. So how do you and I, how do we express and be the Christ we already are in potential? You see, at Christmas, we not only celebrate the birth of Jesus, but we celebrate the awareness of coming into the world of this Christ consciousness, which Jesus grew into. And so it's not something that has to be bestowed on you. It's not something you have to ask for or beg for, because you already are it in potential. It's like this. There are many people, and probably Billy's probably one of them, that had a talent. And that if he didn't practice the piano, we wouldn't be enjoying that talent tonight. But that talent was there, just waiting to be developed. And we get to enjoy it now. And so that Christ potential, that heaven, that Christ consciousness, that Christ idea, yes, that divinity is fully present in you, and that's the truth of you. And so then how do we go about developing it? Next slide. And so those of you who know me, I'm kind of a word wonk. I like to use words very precisely. And we often talk, when we're talking about our spiritual nature, about having a spiritual discipline. But I invite you to think of having a spiritual devotion. And it's not a devotion to a God or a heaven outside of you. It's a devotion to your awareness of your own spiritual nature. Because that's what we're celebrating. Next slide. And so often we talk about spending time meditating, spending time in prayer. And when we spend, we use up, don't we? Yeah. What about thinking about it as having a devotion of investing time in meditation, investing time in prayer, investing time in developing that seed that's within you that is the Christ? I don't know about you, but I'd rather be investing and being devoted than spending and doing discipline. How about you? Yeah. So Charles Fillmore said this in our next slide. This comes from something that was developed in mid-last century called the correspondence school lesson. This is what he said. There is but one power, and we use it as we will. If we send it out, if we send our power out by our thought and word in hate, it destroys. But if we send that same power out in love, it builds. There are not two powers, but two ways of using power. Now that's a radical thought. We say there's only one power, one presence in the universe, and that power is divine, and you are that divinity, you are that Christ nature, you are that power, and yet you have the free will to use that power any way you want. And when you're centered from a hateful nature, that power goes out that way. Haven't you noticed that? Yeah. And so in a way, as radical as it sounds, if God is power, then that God is not using us, we're using it. Wow, radical. It's just waiting for us to use it from a higher level of consciousness. And we want to use our power, we want to use our Christ nature from a standpoint of love, right? And the really interesting thing that's happening these days is that much of what our co-founders in Unity, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, talked about, and other New Thought leaders, is being proven by science today. Next slide. This next slide comes from a newsletter put out by a hospital in Kansas City called St. Lou's, from their heart surgery clinic. So you see this is written by Frank Forensich, Beautiful Practice for the Heart. This is what we know now from science. We also have a very real love capacity, a plastic, trainable ability to extend and receive and experience love in our lives. We can increase its depth and breadth through effort, practice, and experience. You see, if we think of that Christ consciousness as love, and that a divine idea of love, it's not something that falls on us. You know, we talk about falling in love. You know. It's not something that shows up by surprise. It's an innate capacity you have that by your free will, you get to choose to develop. Just like a person who plays the piano so well chooses to develop it. About 10 years ago, I started becoming kind of a gym rat, and I started working out. And if I don't work out, I don't get my reps. If I don't get my reps and my sets, I don't maintain my physical health. Well, similarly, we've got to learn how to exercise this innate power we have in us. Now, just as Charles Fillmore said, we could put out this power in love. This is what we know from science. Next slide. Just as we have a love capacity, we also have a hate capacity that is equally plastic and equally trainable. We develop this capability with sets and reps of what? Bile, contempt, negative judgment, negative thinking. And you know what? Our co-founders knew that. And these doctors know that, forget the spiritual part, they know that when a person is coming from hate or bile, their overall health goes down and they get more heart disease. Guess what happens when you're living from love? The exact opposite, because our minds and our hearts are not separate. And we also know that our humanness, our personality, we know that the human brain appears to have an inherent bias towards negativity. Have you noticed that? As much as Unity people, we don't want to admit it, have you noticed that? Have you ever wondered why? The reason why is that when we were living in the caves, we needed this bias to survive in a way. But you know what? We don't need it anymore. You don't need it anymore. It hurts you Next slide. So there's a Native American parable where a grandson is asking his grandfather, what's happening in the world and what do we do about it? He says, the grandfather says, I feel like wolves are fighting in my heart. One is full of anger and hatred. The other is full of love, forgiveness, and peace. Sound familiar? And the grandson asked the grandfather, well, what do you do about it? And the grandfather says, the one you feed is the one that will survive. You've heard this before, haven't you? If you practice your reps in hatred with vile and negative thinking and negative thoughts, you're feeding that wolf. However, you get to choose which wolf you feed. Next slide. So when we choose to feed the wolf in our heart that is love, we build our love capacity. And don't you want to do that? Yeah. Don't you want to do that? Yes. 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 And we can do that in this slide by affirming the words of Jesus. We talked about that on last Sunday, and we're going to do a little more of that tonight. And Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, our New Thought founders, knew that the mind affected the heart. And friends, we know today by science, that's only half the equation. Because we now know the body can affect the brain, which affects the mind or consciousness. Did you follow that? The body affects the brain, which then affects your state of consciousness. There was an experiment done where people were randomly chosen, and it was one of these double-blind studies, and they were asked to hold a position like this for 2 minutes. And then after they held that position for 2 minutes, they were asked to speak in front of a couple people. And they found that when they held that position for 2 minutes and spoke, they were evaluated as showing up more powerfully and more present. And when they were asked to hold a position like this, or even a prayer position, or a cell phone position, assume the cell phone position, they found that these same people did not show up as powerfully. And so the researchers looked at their blood. And what they found out was that the levels of their cortisol to their testosterone shifted according to simply holding a position in your body. And that when you held a position like this, and there's a couple more, but like this, that it shifted in a way that it affected your brain, which then affected your consciousness. So what does this tell us? It's a unit, folks. Your brain, your mind, and your body are a kind of oneness. And so we want to show up differently. So if you're going for an interview, don't be on your cell phone. And of course, I've been talking about exercise. This takes effort, practice, which creates experience. Next slide. And so, Charles Fillmore said this in Jesus Christ Healed. It is no idle experiment, this keeping in the mind the words of Jesus. It is a very momentous undertaking which may mark the most important period in the life of the individual. Why? Because these words affect consciousness. So let's say them together. All right, next slide. Next slide, please. Let's say them together. I am the light of the world. I am the true vine. I and the Father are one. When you see me, you see the Father. These are words of affirmation that we know that Jesus used to bring forth that Christ nature that is the truth of him, even when he was there in his swaddling clothes. So next slide. So how can we do things so our mind affects our bodies so we can bring forth this love capacity, this Christ nature? Meditation. You've heard about that, right? Meditation. Loving kindness. Loving kindness is a practice that the Buddhists bring to us. And of course, prayer and affirmations. Next slide. Now the interesting thing is, just like in physical exercise, when I'm working out at the gym, if I keep the weight low, I don't make any progress. I have to stress myself and push myself in those tough times at the gym so I get stronger. Billy didn't learn to play this way by doing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, though he started that way, didn't you? Yeah. He got challenged and challenged and challenged. So friends, in a way, the challenges in our lives becomes the chalice in which we learn to develop our Christ nature. So as I say here, in the good times and the bad, we want to build our love capacity. And ironically, in those bad times, when we're staying centered in developing that love and developing our Christ nature, that is when we can make the most progress. It's easy to love somebody you already like. So how can we build our love capacity? Well, through our observations and conversations about gratitude. Instead of talking negatively, can we talk positively? Can we talk supportively? Now, this is not about ignoring the stuff in our life that has to be handled, but we don't have to ruminate on it. How about appreciating the beauty around you and the wonder of your lives? And taking action. Taking action. You know, we have that saying, fake it till you make it. You know that saying, right? And so they say if you're feeling sad, smile, smile, and you'll feel better. Well, what's happening when you're smiling? You're changing your body, right? That's affecting your brain, which is affecting what? Your consciousness. And I don't like to say fake it till you make it. I like to say faith it till you make it. Faith it till you make it. Because if I'm feeling sad, there's a part of me that still has to believe glad is possible for me to smile. Okay? If I'm sad, glad is possible. And one way that I can start that is by using my body. So in a sense, I might believe only 1% of the time that glad is possible, and the other 99%, I don't think it's possible. But if I focus on that 1% and change my body and change my words, what will happen? I change from sad to glad. And you know what? I've noticed I handle life much better when I'm glad. When I'm glad, I'm open. When I'm sad, I'm closed. And that Christ consciousness, that love, that divine idea that is already innately you, is just waiting for you to do that. And I suspect you're here because many of you are already doing that, aren't you? Yeah. So in the midst of chaos and trouble, I know this church has been going through some things. That's the crucible in which you can learn to love each other greater. That's when you're really being called from your divine nature to be the love you are. And in fact, studies have said that human beings do better when there's some disagreement because better decisions are made rather than everyone going, yes. Someone said if we're all thinking alike, there's not much thinking going on. So I invite you to, next slide, stay present. And as you go forth from this service and for the next week, think about which wolf you are feeding. Are you feeding the negative hate? Or are you feeding the love and the Christ you are? Just ask yourself that. How am I being?